Hey y'all, happy Tuesday? Yes, today is Tuesday. So for this week's reflection, we're focusing on attending and observing. I do have my notes down here, so if you see me looking down, that's what I'm looking at. Um, so the first question was, what were your feelings as you watched the first part of the video? Um, when they were doing like the first example, I was very uncomfortable watching the session play out. Um, I found myself starting to get like upset for the client, or the way he was treating the client. I really did not like how dismissive he was being. The fact that he answered a phone call in the middle of a session, I felt he was being so unprofessional. Um, which like leads into the second part of this session. It says, what was the body language or nonverbal communication of the client? Um, you could tell that she started off feeling kind of like hopeful that she was going to show up to the session and she was going to, get some guidance or some help or maybe some relief on what was going on in her mind. But you could tell that she was getting obviously upset and she was bothered. um, Her facial expressions kind of started to shift, especially after the phone rang and he answered it. Like her face was almost like, are you for real right now? Like, you're seriously going to take a phone call in the middle of our session? Like, she was like in disbelief that this was actually happening. Um, and then I noticed that she became more guarded as the session went on. Like she didn't really want to share much. Um, when he kept talking about like him working out at the gym or things like that, she kind of like her body language just shifted. Like she didn't like she seemed very confused as to why they were talking about exercise during the session when that's not the reason she showed up for. And I noticed that she also started to like fidget with her hands. Um, and you could tell that she was just not very, she wasn't pleased with the way that the session was going. And I think if I had to describe the feelings of the counselor, um, I would say that he just seemed very dismissive, very uninterested. He almost seemed like he was bored and didn't really want to be there. And he kept like asking her, you know, well, what do you want to talk about today? Like, what do you think? And kind of taking the conversation completely off track. Um, just kept talking on himself, didn't really seem focused. Um, so it cut and it went to the second part of the video, um, some of the most striking differences that I saw was his body language. In the first session, he's almost like facing away from her. Um, and he's kind of just sitting very, like very casual, like almost like if he's just hanging out at home. And so in the second part of the video, he's, sitting side by side. He's sitting side by side with her, kind of turning his body to face her. He leans in gently. Sorry, my phone thinks I'm talking to it. Um, and so that kind of made him seem like he was more open. He was being more receptive, really focusing on her. Um, in the second part of the video, his eye contact also improved. He was looking at her, um, and not like in a staring way, but in a, you know, maintaining that eye contact of following, the conversation, keeping track of how her body language, how she was responding. And I also noticed that he stayed on topic, and he was actually listening to the client this time around. Um, he was, asking these questions that were moving the conversation along, and I think because of that, she was a lot more receptive, and the conversation was a lot more productive the second time around, as opposed to the first time. He was just so dismissive and just kind of came off as rude, and that caused the client to shut down. And she just, I think she just felt so uncomfortable and she wanted to leave. But in the second part, when he was more open, he was more receptive, his eye contact was better. He was, staying on topic, really listening to what she was saying. It really steered the conversation in a different direction, in a more positive direction, just by making those simple changes. So when I think about, sorry, when I think about like my daily interactions in this, my school setting, um, do I think it would be difficult to always be attending and observant of my clients in a school setting? I think it could be, um, especially when you're working with, I mean, the school setting that I teach at, it's an early childhood. So a lot of times kids are still learning how to regulate their emotions. So I do think that it would be a little bit difficult, but I don't think it would be impossible. Um, I think definitely like in a whole group setting, it would be more difficult to be, as observant or as, attending to or having those attending skills. Um, but I think it could be easier if during small group or maybe even individual settings, because obviously the less external stimuli that there is, the easier it is to be observant. But when I think about what strengths I can currently pull from, I think about how I've been a teacher for 10 plus years. And, over the years, I've had to learn to be observant regardless of how much or how little external stimuli is going on in the classroom. Um, so I think that I, having that educator background, can be helpful for me. I could consider it a strength. Um, because I've had to learn to be observant and kind of really think about each individual kid, even though, most of the time I have at least 20 kids in a classroom. When I think about the areas that I know I'll need to monitor or work on, I think about my body language. Um, I am naturally a very anxious and nervous person. So I think sometimes I may come off as like appear to be closed off, and it's not intentional. It's just I find myself, because I get very antsy and, anxious in certain situations, I'll start fidgeting or um, I find myself that I tend to cross my arms a lot when I'm talking to people sometimes, and I need to be more conscious of that because crossing your arms in the middle of a conversation, especially with clients or, future students, um, it could come off as me being uninterested or me shutting down or kind of, you know, them interpreting it as like oh, she doesn't want to be here or she's done with the conversation. So I know that I need to work on that. And I hope that this semester through this course and all the skill setter videos that we have to do um, will help me to become more self aware of my body language and the way I present myself. And I think something else I might also need to work on is eye contact. Um, I think growing up in a Mexican American household, um, holding eye contact when you are talking to someone about a serious conversation. Sometimes my dad saw it as a sign of disrespect. Um, and so it's kind of like I've been having to rewire my brain and reframe my thinking around eye contact and how avoiding eye contact sometimes may come off as disinterest. And so that's something that, I acknowledge that I need to work on. And hopefully, as I'm recording myself doing all these reflections and things like that, I will be able to work on that. And when I think about my natural ways of showing empathy, I would say I'm an active listener. I I don't ask a lot of questions, but I do ask questions, try to keep it to relevant questions. And if it feels appropriate, I I do open up about similar experiences, as a way to try to be empathetic and, connect to the person that I'm talking to. And finally, when I consider my own style of problem solving, um, and goal attainment needs, I think that sometimes that these might sometimes hinder my ability to observe, um, because I feel like I'm kind of like a perfectionist sometimes, and I get so caught up in wanting to do things right or maybe getting caught up on the negative aspects of things when I'm trying to solve a problem. Um, I find myself being guilty of seeing things as a glass half empty instead of a glass half full, um, type of thinking. So I think that when it comes to attending and observing, that might hinder me because I might get caught up on the problem or how to fix something instead of just listening and maybe guiding the client, um, and really showing that I am there to guide them instead of just fixing it for them and focusing on the negative things. Um, so I know that those are some things that I need to work on. But those are just some of the thoughts I had this week about when it comes to attending and observing skills. I hope to hear, sorry, not I hope to hear, but I hope to kind of gain some knowledge from other people's experiences. So I can't wait to hear the rest of everybody else's responses. See y'all soon.